The mop hit the linoleum with the same rhythmic precision Major Kaida, Ghost, Nakamura had once used to land F-22 Raptors on pitching carrier decks in the South China Sea. Steam rose from the bucket beside her, carrying the acrid smell of industrial cleaner through the mess hall at Nellis Air Force Base. At 5:30 hours, the dining facility stood empty, except for the soft scrape of her shoes against wet floor and the distant hum of fluorescent lights that had witnessed 1,000 pre-dawn briefings. She paused, wringing the mop with calloused hands that had once gripped the stick of a $65 million fighter jet. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago, she'd been pulling 7Gs over contested airspace. Now she was pulling night shifts in custodial services, invisible to the same pilots who'd once called her the finest stick-and-rudder pilot in the Pacific Fleet. The demotion had come swift and merciless after the incident over the Taiwan Strait, classified, buried, forgotten by everyone except the review board that had stripped her wings. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched toward mountains that caught the first pale light of dawn. Through the mess hall windows, she could see the flight line where F-35 Lightning IIs sat in perfect rows, their angular surfaces gleaming like sleeping predators. Each aircraft represented everything she'd lost, everything she'd been. The ache in her chest was sharper than the desert wind that rattled the building's metal siding. The cleaning cart's squeaky wheel announced her movement as she worked her way between tables where young aviators would soon gather for morning chow. They'd joke and boast about their training sorties, never noticing the woman who cleaned their spilled coffee and discarded mission notes. She'd become a ghost in her own world, hence the call sign that had once struck fear into enemy radar operators from Beijing to Pyongyang. But something was different this morning. Through the kitchen service window, she caught a glimpse of unusual activity on the tarmac. Ground crews moved with urgent purpose around aircraft she didn't recognize, sleek, angular shapes that seemed to bend light around their surfaces. The silhouettes looked wrong, too advanced even for the experimental programs she'd known about during her active years. Kaida's hand tightened on the mop handle. In her former life, she would have been briefed on any new aircraft arriving at Nellis. The base hosted red flag exercises and weapons testing that pushed the boundaries of aviation technology. But these machines looked like they'd pushed beyond those boundaries entirely. The mess hall door burst open with military urgency. Colonel Marcus Webb strode in, his flight suit crisp despite the early hour, followed by two officers she didn't recognize. Their eyes swept the empty dining area before settling on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Webb's expression was unreadable, but she caught something in his gaze: recognition, calculation, perhaps even relief. The cleaning supplies suddenly felt heavier in her hands as the three officers approached, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space like Judgment Day. Webb stopped 3 feet away, his weathered face betraying nothing. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled only by the hum of ventilation systems and the distant rumble of jet engines spinning up for morning operations. Kaida kept her eyes down, focusing on the reflection of fluorescent lights in the wet floor. She'd learned to make herself small, unremarkable, invisible to the hierarchy that had once embraced her. "Major Nakamura," Webb said finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority and something else: urgency. "We need to talk." She looked up then, meeting his gaze for the first time in months. The colonel she'd known had been fair but distant, a by-the-books officer who'd never shown particular interest in her career. Now his eyes held a different quality, almost desperate. Behind him, the two unknown officers watched her with the intensity of hunters evaluating prey. "Sir, I'm just trying to finish my shift," she replied, her voice steady despite the questions racing through her mind. The cleaning cart felt like armor between them, a barrier that defined her new place in the military hierarchy. One of the unknown officers stepped forward, a woman with silver eagles on her shoulders and prematurely gray hair that spoke of classified briefings and sleepless nights. "Major, I'm Colonel Elena Vasquez, Pentagon Special Operations. What I'm about to tell you is compartmentalized above your current clearance level, but circumstances have forced our hand. Qaida's pulse quickened. Pentagon Special Operations meant black programs, the kind of work that existed in the shadows between official military doctrine and plausible deniability. She'd brushed against that world during her active years, flying missions that never appeared in official logs. With respect, Colonel, my clearance was revoked after the Taiwan incident, Vasquez interrupted. Yes, we're aware of your situation. We're also aware that you're the only pilot on this continent who's successfully engaged and defeated the aircraft type we're now facing. The mop slipped from Qaida's grasp, clattering against the bucket. Taiwan. The classified engagement that had cost her everything, the encounter that had been buried so deep that even she sometimes wondered if it had actually happened. But these officers knew. They'd read the real reports, not the sanitized version that had painted her as reckless and insubordinate. Webb's expression softened marginally. Ghost, 6 hours ago, we lost contact with 3 F-22s over the Pacific. Satellite imagery shows aircraft matching the ones you encountered 8 months ago. The nickname hit her like a physical blow. No one had called her Ghost since her demotion. It belonged to a different person, a different life where her hands had controlled machinery worth more than most people's homes. Outside, the mysterious aircraft on the tarmac were beginning to move, their engines producing a sound unlike anything in the conventional inventory. The noise was almost musical, a harmony of frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest. Through the mess hall windows, she watched ground crews disconnect power cables and remove wheel chocks with practiced efficiency. Whatever was happening, it was happening now. The timing of this conversation wasn't coincidental. These officers hadn't come to reminisce about classified encounters or offer apologies for her ruined career. They needed something from her, something only she could provide. The realization settled over her like the weight of a flight suit, familiar and terrifying in equal measure. Colonel Vasquez was still talking, her words painting a picture of technological superiority and tactical disadvantage that Qaida understood all too well. The enemy had evolved, adapted, improved upon whatever she'd faced over the Taiwan Strait. And somehow, impossibly, she was being asked to face them again. The mess hall's institutional lighting cast harsh shadows across the officers' faces as Colonel Vasquez continued her briefing. At 23:47 hours last night, Kadena Air Base in Okinawa detected multiple unknown contacts approaching Japanese airspace. The aircraft matched no known configuration in our databases, moving at speeds and altitudes that challenged our understanding of atmospheric flight dynamics. Qaida found herself leaning against the cleaning cart, her mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode despite months of enforced civilian thinking. Unknown contacts over the Pacific meant Chinese testing programs or worse, technology that had evolved beyond current defensive capabilities. Her encounter over Taiwan had proven that gap existed. Apparently, it had only widened. JASDF scrambled F-35s from Misawa, Webb added, his voice tight with controlled tension. They achieved radar lock twice before the unknown simply vanished from all sensors. No jamming signature, no electronic warfare indicators. They just stopped existing on our screens while remaining visually observable to the pilots. Stealth technology beyond current parameters. Qaida had seen it before, felt the helplessness of watching targets disappear from her displays while knowing they remained lethal and present. The memory of that Taiwan engagement came flooding back. The confusion, the fear, the moment when everything she'd learned about air combat had proven inadequate. The third officer, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't place, possibly European. Major Nakamura, your after-action report from the Taiwan incident described engagement protocols that don't exist in any manual. You developed countermeasures in real time against technology we're still trying to understand. That report, the one that had been classified beyond her clearance level immediately after filing, she'd written it in clinical detail, documenting every system failure, every tactical adaptation, every desperate gambit that had kept her alive long enough to return to base. The review board had called her methods unorthodox and dangerous. Now these officers were calling them necessary. Sir, with respect, those countermeasures barely worked. I was lucky to survive the encounter. The understatement felt bitter in her mouth. Luck had nothing to do with the calculated risks and split-second decisions that had saved her life over disputed waters. But admitting competence felt dangerous now, too close to the pride that had once defined her. Vasquez pulled a tablet from her flight bag, its screen showing satellite imagery of the Pacific. This morning's engagement lasted 14 minutes. 3 F-22s with experienced pilots never achieved effective weapon lock. One aircraft returned to base with partial hydraulic failure. The other two are currently missing, last position approximately 200 nautical miles northwest of Guam. Missing, not shot down, not destroyed, missing. The distinction was important in military terminology, implying uncertainty rather than confirmed loss. But Qaeda understood the subtext. Those pilots were dead, their aircraft scattered across the ocean floor or captured for analysis. The enemy had evolved beyond her previous encounter, become more lethal and efficient. The mysterious aircraft outside were taxiing toward the active runway now, their movement graceful and predatory. Whatever technology had been developed in response to her Taiwan report, it was about to be tested against an opponent who had already proven superior to conventional forces. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said finally, though part of her already knew the answer. Colonel Vasquez smiled grimly. "We're asking you to go back to work, Major, real work." The hangar smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the peculiar ozone scent that accompanied advanced avionics systems. Qaeda followed the three officers across the polished concrete floor, her civilian cleaning uniform feeling increasingly absurd among the purposeful activity of flight crews and maintenance personnel. Technicians moved around the mysterious aircraft with reverent precision, their movements suggesting familiarity with systems far beyond standard military equipment. Up close, the lead aircraft was even more extraordinary. Its surface appeared to shift and flow like liquid mercury, adapting to the ambient lighting with technology that made conventional stealth coding seem primitive. No visible seams marked the integration of wings and fuselage. The entire aircraft seemed grown rather than assembled, organic in its perfection. "Project Wraith," Webb said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and apprehension. 18 months of development based on your Taiwan engagement data. The engineers called your combat adaptations impossible until they started building systems around them. A maintenance chief approached their group, her coveralls bearing patches from aerospace contractors Qaeda didn't recognize. "Colonel, we've completed the pre-flight inspection. All systems are showing green across the board. The neural interface has been calibrated for the Major's previous flight parameters." Neural interface. The word sent a chill through Qaeda's chest. She'd heard rumors of such technology during her active years, experimental systems that bypassed traditional controls by reading pilot intentions directly from brain activity. The concept promised unprecedented response times, but carried risks that made test pilots request hazard pay increases. "You built this for me specifically?" she asked, trying to keep disbelief out of her voice. Vasquez nodded toward the aircraft's cockpit, where a helmet unlike any she'd seen rested on the ejection seat. The Wraith program required a pilot who could think beyond conventional parameters, someone who'd already proven capable of engaging unknown threats with improvised tactics. Your Taiwan mission provided the baseline data for every system on this aircraft. The implications were staggering. While she'd spent months mopping floors and emptying trash cans, Teams of engineers had been analyzing her combat decisions and building technology around her thought processes. The aircraft before her represented not just advanced engineering, but a fundamental shift in how air combat might be conducted. A young technician climbed down from the cockpit area, his face flushed with the excitement of working on cutting-edge technology. "Ma'am, the interface calibration is complete. The system's been running simulations based on your previous engagement profiles. It's eager to fly." Eager to fly. As if the aircraft possessed some form of consciousness, some desire beyond its programming. Kaida approached the ladder leading to the cockpit, each step feeling like a movement toward a different version of herself. The woman who cleaned mess halls was falling away, replaced by someone she'd thought was permanently buried under shame and bureaucratic judgment. The cockpit interior bore little resemblance to traditional fighter aircraft. Instead of conventional instruments, smooth surfaces displayed information through embedded screens that seemed to emerge from the very structure of the aircraft. The neural interface helmet sat waiting, its interior lined with contacts that would rest against her skull and read the electrical patterns of her thoughts. "The enemy aircraft from this morning are still in the area," Webb said from the hangar floor below. "Satellite tracking suggests they're conducting some form of patrol pattern, possibly testing our response capabilities. This could be our only chance to engage them with equal technology." Equal technology. The phrase carried weight beyond its simple meaning. For months, she'd lived with the knowledge that American air superiority was no longer guaranteed, that enemies possessed capabilities that rendered traditional fighter tactics obsolete. Now she was being offered the chance to level that playing field, to prove that pilot skill could still matter in an age of technological supremacy. But the neural interface represented a leap into unknown territory, a merger of human consciousness and machine capability that carried risks beyond simple mechanical failure. The flight suit felt strange against her skin after months of civilian clothing, its integrated systems recognizing her biometrics and automatically adjusting temperature and pressure settings. Kaida sat in the Wraith's cockpit while technicians made final preparations, the neural interface helmet heavy in her hands. Through the aircraft's transparent canopy, she could see ground crews moving with practiced urgency, their faces reflecting the tension of an operation balanced on the edge of classified parameters. "Ghost, you're showing green on all systems," came Webb's voice through the communication headset. The use of her call sign felt like putting on familiar clothing after a long absence. "Neural interface is standing by for initialization. Remember, the system will amplify your natural flight instincts but won't override your decision-making authority." She lowered the helmet over her head, feeling the interface contacts settle against her scalp with surprising gentleness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then sensation flooded through her consciousness, not sight or sound, but pure awareness of the aircraft's systems and capabilities. She could feel the engine's power curves, sense the control surface's responsiveness, perceive the weapon system's targeting parameters as extensions of her own body. It was like awakening from a dream of limitation into a reality of unlimited possibility. "Interface connection established," reported the technician monitoring her vitals. "Neural pathway integration at 97% efficiency. Major, how do you feel?" How did she feel? Like herself for the first time in months. The Wraith wasn't just an aircraft. It was an extension of her will, a technological amplification of every instinct that had kept her alive over the Taiwan Strait. Through the neural link, she could sense the enemy aircraft still patrolling somewhere beyond the horizon, their signatures appearing in her consciousness like distant stars. "Control, this is Ghost requesting taxi clearance," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Ready for immediate departure." The control tower's response came through encrypted channels, acknowledgement of a mission that officially didn't exist. As the Wraith began to move, its engines producing that distinctive harmonic resonance, Kaida felt the weight of months of humiliation and doubt lifting from her shoulders. This wasn't just a return to active duty. It was a chance to prove that human adaptability could triumph over technological superiority. The runway stretched ahead like a pathway to redemption. Behind her, the mess hall where she'd spent countless hours in invisible servitude grew smaller and less significant. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just the outcome of this engagement, but the future of air combat itself. Through the neural interface, she could sense the Wraith's eagerness to prove itself, to justify the faith that engineers and commanders had placed in untested technology. But more than that, she could sense her own readiness to reclaim the sky that had once been her domain. The takeoff was unlike anything in her previous experience, the Wraith lifting from the runway with an effortlessness that seemed to defy physics. Through the neural interface, Kaida could feel every air current, sense every pressure variation as the aircraft climbed through the morning sky above Nevada. The sensation was intoxicating, pure flight distilled to its essence, unmediated by the crude mechanical controls of conventional aircraft. "Ghost, you're cleared to engage the test parameters," came Vasquez's voice through the encrypted channel. "Remember, the enemy aircraft from this morning are still unaccounted for. Assume hostile intent and engage at your discretion." Hostile intent. The clinical military language couldn't disguise the reality of what she was being asked to do. Somewhere out there, pilots in advanced aircraft were testing American defenses, probing for weaknesses in systems that had once guaranteed air superiority. Her job was to remind them that some advantages couldn't be measured in technology alone. The Pacific stretched endlessly below, its surface reflecting the morning sun in patterns that shifted like living things. At 40,000 feet, the Wraith moved through air so thin that conventional aircraft would struggle to maintain control. But through the neural interface, Kaida could feel the atmosphere's subtle variations as clearly as a pianist feels individual keys beneath her fingers. "Contact," she announced, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Multiple unknowns bearing 270, range approximately 100 nautical miles. Count 3 aircraft in loose formation." The enemy had returned to the same general area where they'd engaged the F-22s earlier. Either they were supremely confident in their technological advantage, or they were deliberately baiting American forces into another confrontation. Either way, they were about to discover that the rules of engagement had changed. Through the Wraith's advanced sensors, she could see the unknown aircraft more clearly than any previous encounter. They were sleek and angular like her own, but their design philosophy differed in subtle ways that suggested different priorities. Where the Wraith emphasized integration between pilot and machine, these aircraft seemed focused on pure autonomous capability. "Ghost, be advised that our satellites are detecting unusual electromagnetic activity in your area. The unknowns may be attempting some form of electronic warfare." She could feel it through the neural interface, waves of disruptive energy designed to confuse targeting systems and overwhelm pilot decision-making processes. It was more sophisticated than anything she'd encountered over Taiwan, a coordinated assault on multiple sensory channels that would have left conventional pilots flying blind. But the Wraith systems adapted in real time, filtering the interference and maintaining clear targeting data. More importantly, the neural interface allowed her to process multiple threat streams simultaneously, turning what should have been overwhelming complexity into manageable tactical information. The first enemy aircraft broke formation, accelerating toward her position with impossible speed. Through the interface, she could sense its pilot's intentions, feel the aggressive confidence that came from technological superiority. But confidence was a weakness when it led to predictable tactics. Kaida rolled the Wraith inverted and dove toward the ocean's surface, using gravity and the aircraft's advanced maneuverability to transform potential energy into tactical advantage. The neural link made the maneuver feel natural rather than calculated. Her consciousness merged with the aircraft's flight characteristics until the distinction between pilot and machine became meaningless. The engagement was about to begin, and everything would be different this time. The first missile launch came without warning, a streak of superheated air that carved through the morning sky like a burning sword. Through the neural interface, Kaida felt the threat approaching before her conventional sensors could have detected it. The Wraith's consciousness merged with hers, processing electromagnetic signatures and flight trajectories with inhuman precision and human intuition. She rolled left and climbed, the aircraft responding to her thoughts rather than her hands. The missile passed beneath them, its proximity sensor confused by the Wraith's adaptive stealth characteristics. But two more launches followed immediately, and she realized the enemy was testing her defensive capabilities with probing attacks rather than committing to full engagement. "Ghost, multiple missile launches detected," came the urgent voice from Nellie's control. "Confirm your status." "Still breathing," she transmitted, diving toward the ocean's surface as another missile streaked past her position. "These pilots are good. They're not making the same mistakes as Taiwan." The unknown aircraft were repositioning now, using three-dimensional tactics that suggested pilots trained for combat against advanced opponents. They'd learned from previous encounters, adapted their formations and engagement profiles to counter the specific advantages she demonstrated months ago. The realization sent a chill through her chest. They'd been studying her just as carefully as her own engineers had been studying them. Through the interface, she could sense the lead aircraft's pilot making decisions with mechanical precision, each maneuver calculated for maximum effectiveness rather than guided by instinct or emotion. It was like fighting a chess master who could see 20 moves ahead, every action part of a larger strategy she couldn't yet perceive. But human unpredictability remained her advantage. Where the enemy relied on calculated responses, she could improvise, adapt, make decisions that defied logical analysis. The neural interface amplified this capability, allowing her to translate intuitive leaps into immediate action without the delay of conscious thought. She pulled the Wraith into a vertical climb that would have been impossible in conventional aircraft, using the enemy's own missile to mask her approach vector. The maneuver was pure instinct, born from years of combat experience and amplified by technology that could keep pace with human creativity. "Fox 3, she announced, launching her own missile at the closest unknown aircraft. The weapon was as advanced as her platform, capable of adapting its guidance system to counter electronic warfare attempts. But more importantly, it carried her intentions through the neural interface, becoming an extension of her will rather than a separate system. The enemy pilot tried to evade, rolling and diving in patterns that would have defeated conventional missiles. But the Wraith's weapon maintained lock, adjusting its trajectory with the same intuitive flexibility that guided Kaida's own flight path. When it detonated, the explosion was visible for miles, a brilliant flash that announced the return of American air superiority to the Pacific theater. One down, two to go. The remaining enemy aircraft immediately changed tactics, abandoning their probing attacks for coordinated assault patterns that spoke of extensive training and technological confidence. They moved with fluid precision, each maneuver supporting their partner's position while maintaining optimal attack geometry against her aircraft. But they hadn't counted on the neural interface's ability to process multiple threat streams simultaneously. Through the Wraith's consciousness, Kaida could track both aircraft while maintaining situational awareness of the broader tactical picture. It was like conducting a symphony of violence, each element coordinated through pure thought. The ocean rushed past beneath them as all three aircraft dove toward the surface, their engines carving contrails through the thin air. At this altitude and speed, a single mistake would mean death. There was no margin for error, no time for second thoughts or conventional defensive measures. Through the interface, she felt the moment when the enemy pilots realized they were facing something beyond their experience. Their tactical confidence wavered as the Wraith demonstrated capabilities that shouldn't have existed, maneuverability that defied their understanding of aerodynamic limitations. For the first time in the engagement, she sensed uncertainty in their decision-making processes. Uncertainty was vulnerability, and Qaeda pressed her advantage without mercy. The second enemy aircraft made its mistake at 12,000 feet, committing to an attack run that required straight-line flight for 3 crucial seconds. Through the neural interface, Qaeda felt the pilot's intention crystallize into action before the aircraft even began its maneuver. She was ready, the Wraith already positioning for an intercept that would bring them within cannon range. "Going guns," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the G-forces that would have crushed a conventional pilot. The Wraith systems compensated for the physical stress, maintaining her consciousness clear and focused while her body endured forces that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. The cannon rounds found their target with devastating precision, each shell guided by the same neural integration that controlled the aircraft. The unknown fighter disintegrated in a cascade of debris and superheated metal, its advanced technology no match for the marriage of human intuition and artificial intelligence. 2 down. The final enemy aircraft had witnessed both kills, its pilot undoubtedly analyzing the Wraith's capabilities and adjusting tactics accordingly. But analysis took time, and time was a luxury neither pilot could afford at these speeds and altitudes. The engagement had devolved into pure reaction, training and instinct competing against technological advantage. Ghost satellite imagery shows additional contacts inbound from the northwest, came the urgent transmission from command. ETA approximately 15 minutes. Recommend you disengage and return to base. Additional contacts meant reinforcements, enemy aircraft vectoring toward the engagement zone to provide support or extract intelligence from the battle. The smart tactical decision would be to withdraw, to preserve the Wraith and its capabilities for future encounters. But the remaining pilot was still out there, still a threat to American forces and interests. More importantly, this was personal now. The enemy had cost her career, her reputation, her place in the military hierarchy she'd served with distinction. This engagement wasn't just about national security. It was about proving that human adaptability could triumph over technological superiority. Through the neural interface, she could sense the final aircraft's position and bearing, feel its pilot's desperation as tactical options narrowed to a handful of high-risk maneuvers. They were both skilled, both flying advanced technology, both committed to victory regardless of cost. Only one would return to base. The final engagement began with a head-on pass that tested both pilots' nerve and their aircraft's structural limitations. At a combined closing speed that approached Mach 4, reaction time measured in fractions of seconds, margin for error vanished entirely. Through the neural interface, Qaeda felt the enemy pilot's tension, sensed the calculation behind every micro-adjustment of flight path and weapons targeting. But she also felt something else: respect. This pilot had watched 2 wingmates die, face technology that seemed impossible, and still committed to the engagement. Whatever flag they served under, whatever political motivations drove their mission, they possessed the same warrior spirit that had defined her own career. The respect didn't diminish her determination to kill them. They passed within 50 meters of each other, close enough to see the enemy pilot's helmet through the cockpit glass. For an instant that felt like eternity, Qaeda met their gaze across the void, 2 professionals acknowledging the deadly dance they'd chosen to perform. Then they were past, pulling maximum G-force turns that stressed both aircraft to their design limits. Ghost, additional contacts now bearing 090, range 60 nautical miles, came the increasingly urgent voice from command. Multiple bandits inbound your position. You need to disengage now. Multiple bandits meant a full squadron, overwhelming numbers that even the Wraith couldn't hope to engage successfully. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, strategic considerations demanding immediate withdrawal to preserve assets and intelligence. But the neural interface was feeding her data about the remaining enemy aircraft, showing vulnerabilities in its maneuvering patterns that suggested pilot fatigue or system limitations. One more pass, one more opportunity to prove that courage and skill could overcome any technological advantage. She pulled the Wraith into a climbing spiral that used the aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain altitude advantage. The enemy pilot followed, matching her climb but losing precious energy in the process. Through the interface, she could sense their confusion as familiar tactics failed to achieve expected results. The Neuralink was providing more than just enhanced flight control. It was reading the psychological patterns of combat, translating emotional states into tactical intelligence. She could feel the enemy pilot's growing desperation, sense the moment when training gave way to instinct and instinct proved inadequate. At 30,000 feet, the unknown aircraft finally made its fatal error. Committed to a missile launch that required stable flight, the pilot held course for 2 seconds longer than survival demanded. The Wraith systems had been tracking the setup, calculating intercept vectors before the enemy's intentions became action. Fox 2, Qaeda announced, launching her final air-to-air missile at point-blank range. The weapon had barely time to arm before impacting its target, transforming the enemy aircraft into an expanding sphere of superheated gas and twisted metal. 3 down, mission complete. But the celebration lasted only seconds before her sensors detected the approaching squadron, 8 aircraft at least, flying in formation and closing fast. The Wraith was nearly out of fuel and completely out of missiles. Discretion had become the better part of valor. "Command, this is Ghost. 3 bandits neutralized. Winchester and Bingo fuel, RTB immediately." The flight home felt different from any previous return to base. Through the neural interface, Qaeda could sense the Wraith's satisfaction, if such a term applied to artificial intelligence merged with human consciousness. The aircraft had proven itself in combat, validated the faith of engineers and commanders who'd gambled careers on untested technology. More importantly, she had proven herself. The months of humiliation and menial labor had been preparation for this moment, a crucible that had stripped away everything except the essential skills that made her a warrior. The woman who'd mopped mess halls was gone, replaced by someone harder and more focused than the pilot who'd been shot down over Taiwan. As Nevada's mountains appeared on the horizon, she began composing the after-action report that would reshape American air combat doctrine. The neural interface had recorded every moment of the engagement, captured data that would influence fighter design for decades to come. But beyond the technical achievements lay a more fundamental truth, that human creativity and determination remained the ultimate weapons system. The Nellie's approach control cleared her for immediate landing, emergency vehicles standing by despite her assurance that the aircraft was undamaged. Through the canopy, she could see crowds gathering along the flight line, maintenance crews, pilots, officers who'd heard rumors of the morning's activities and wanted to witness history returning to Earth. Colonel Webb's voice came through the radio as she lined up for final approach. "Ghost, welcome home. The Pentagon's been asking for preliminary results. What should I tell them?" She smiled inside the neural interface helmet, feeling the Wraith respond to her emotional state with subtle adjustments to trim and power settings. The aircraft was learning from her just as she'd learned from it, a partnership that promised capabilities beyond anything either could achieve alone. "Tell them the sky belongs to America again," she transmitted, touching down on the runway where her career had been resurrected from the ashes of shame and bureaucratic judgment. The hangar erupted in controlled chaos as technicians swarmed over the Wraith, downloading flight data and analyzing system performance, while Qaeda underwent medical evaluation and intelligence debriefing. Colonel Vasquez stood nearby, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with barely contained excitement about the implications of the morning's success. Preliminary analysis shows 3 confirmed kills against unknown aircraft types, she reported to the growing crowd of officers and engineers. Neural interface performance exceeded all projected parameters. The pilot adapted to combat conditions that would have overwhelmed conventional systems. But Qaeda barely heard the technical discussions swirling around her. Sitting on the hangar floor with her back against a tool cabinet, still wearing the flight suit that had carried her through resurrection, she found herself thinking about the enemy pilots who wouldn't be going home. They'd been skilled and brave, worthy opponents who deserved better than anonymous death over empty ocean. War was like that, though, impersonal despite the intimate nature of air combat. Those pilots had served their country with the same dedication she'd shown to hers. The only difference was technological advantage, and perhaps a measure of luck that had favored her this morning. "Major Nakamura," came a voice she didn't recognize. Looking up, she saw a general's stars on the collar of an officer who'd apparently arrived while she was lost in thought. His face was weathered but kind, bearing the expression of someone who'd made hard decisions in service of national security. "Sir," she said, starting to rise, but he gestured for her to remain seated. "General Harrison, Air Combat Command, I wanted to personally thank you for what you accomplished today. The intelligence value alone of this engagement will influence our defensive posture for years to come." He paused, studying her face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading character under pressure. "But more than that, you've reminded everyone that courage and skill still matter in an age of technological warfare." The words should have felt like vindication, official recognition that her career hadn't ended in disgrace over the Taiwan Strait. Instead, they felt like the beginning of something new, a responsibility that extended beyond personal redemption to the broader question of how humans and machines might work together in an increasingly complex world. "Sir, with respect, the real victory belongs to the engineers who built the Wraith and the commanders who were willing to trust unproven technology. I was just the delivery system." General Harrison smiled at that, the expression of a leader who'd found the kind of modesty that made great pilots exceptional officers. "Major, effective immediately you're restored to active flying status with all privileges and responsibilities. The Wraith program needs a test pilot who understands both its capabilities and limitations. Interested in the position?" Through the hangar windows, she could see the flight line where F-35s and F-22s sat in perfect rows, conventional aircraft that had defined air superiority for decades. But in a corner of the hangar, the Wraith waited under protective covers, its revolutionary design pointing toward a future where the boundary between pilot and aircraft might disappear entirely. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. This was her element, her calling, the thing she'd been born to do regardless of the personal cost or professional risk. "Yes, sir," she said simply. "When do we start?" 6 months later, Major Qaeda Ghost Nakamura stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, her uniform bearing the ribbon for the Distinguished Flying Cross and the quiet confidence of someone who'd helped redefine the possible. The cadets in the audience represented the future of American air power, young men and women who would inherit technologies and capabilities that existed only in theory when their instructors had learned to fly. "The neural interface isn't about replacing human judgment with artificial intelligence," she explained, clicking to the next slide in her presentation. "It's about amplifying human capabilities, allowing pilots to process information and execute decisions at speeds that conventional systems can't match. But the most important component remains unchanged: the warrior who sits in the cockpit." A cadet in the third row raised her hand. "Ma'am, what was it like fighting enemy aircraft that were technologically superior to anything in our inventory?" The question brought back memories of that morning over the Pacific. The fear, the exhilaration, the moment when training and instinct merged with advanced technology to create something greater than the sum of its parts. But it also reminded her of the enemy pilots who hadn't survived the encounter, professionals who'd served their nation with the same dedication she brought to hers. Humbling, she said finally, technology is.